Hi, everyone. I'm Petra Mayer. I'm an editor at NPR Books, and I'm here to welcome you all to this panel on drawing apart new coming-of-age comics. We've got a really amazing panel for you this afternoon or morning or whenever you're going to see this panel. I'm not sure because we're pre-taping. Glenn Head is an alternative cartoonist whose work has appeared in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Playboy, and lots more. He was the co-creator with Kaz of the comic anthology Snake Eyes. His solo books include Avenue D, Gutter Snipe, Chicago, and his brand new graphic memoir, Chartwell Manor. Our Kikuo Johnson is a cartoonist and illustrator whose award-winning drawings and stories regularly appear in books, advertisements, periodicals, animation, and on the cover of The New Yorker. He divides his time between drawing in Brooklyn, teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design, and playing the ukulele with his family in Hawaii, which sounds awesome, honestly. His books include Night Fisher and the upcoming graphic novella, No One Else. And finally, Lizzy Stewart is an illustrator and author currently based in London, which I'm hideously jealous of. She has written and illustrated 3 books for children and countless self-published comics and zines. She teaches illustration at Goldsmiths University and has also taught courses at the Tate and on behalf of the National Portrait Gallery. Her upcoming comics collection is called It's Not What You Thought It Would Be. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to meet you all and to have read your books and to be able to talk about them. But I have been able to read your books, and probably our audience has not. So if you wouldn't mind each kind of just letting us know what's going on in your most recent books. Lizzy, why don't we start with you?
Oh my gosh, I knew it was going to be me first. And
Sorry, I read your mind.
I've seen this before. So this will be an exciting first bash at trying to summarize a book that's sort of a bit all over the place. But it's a collection of short stories. Some of them are linked together and some of them are not, but they were originally made as individual comics, but they're kind of strung together into a narrative that follows some young women through their young-ish lives from childhood through to their maybe 30s, and I guess looks at their attempts to figure out how to be, I suppose.
Pretty universal project, I think.
Yeah, there we go.
Glenn, how about you?
Okay, my book Chartwell Manor is a boarding school memoir that takes place early in 1971, and it's all about what it's like being in this boarding school where there is a serial pedophile, and my character Glenn, at the age of 13, from the age of 13 to 15, the experience of what that's like. And then the following chapters are all about his attempts to deal with it. So it skips forward several decades all the way up to me in my 50s and what life is like after all that, as well as how some of the other students that went to the school were affected and how I was affected, as well as the court case and what life is like now. I guess that's the best way to summarize it.
Kikuo?
My newest book, No One Else, is a short graphic novella. It's a family drama about a mom, her young son, and her brother kind of rebuilding their lives after death in the family.
So it struck me, the description for this panel is non-traditional coming-of-age stories, but what struck me about your books, having read them all, is that even if the specific experience is not universal, like I don't think a lot of us have dealt with a serial pedophile in a boarding school. I don't think a lot of us have dealt with something that awful, but a lot of us have had the experience of reckoning with a trauma in later life, or even just trying to tell our parents something important and getting blown off. So how are you all thinking about your readers and or were you even trying to make these stories universal? How were you thinking about your readership when you were constructing these stories?
I'll start.
Sure.
I guess in terms of making it universal, it's a fair point that hopefully not everyone does deal with a serial pedophile, but what everyone does end up having to deal with is coming to grips with family and coming to grips with how they were dealt with. And my book is in actual fact more of a family drama than it is actually a boarding school memoir per se. It's really very much about my dealings with my parents and getting them to accept my own personal history. So there's a great deal of that. And I think that in actual fact, we all deal with that to some extent. So I feel like we are told many things by our parents, and at a certain point, we end up having to come up against that and face them and have them face us. So in that respect, I can see where that's universal.
Anyone else want to chime in? Yeah, go ahead.
I think in No One Else, I was lucky enough to know all four of my grandparents, and I slowly lost them over the course of about 30 years. And I just noticed with each loss or a kind of family dynamic just shift a little bit, and in big ways and in small ways in the immediate family and in the extended family. And that just seems like a universal experience, and it's something that I thought I really wanted to explore. Also, a lot of like potential humor, I think, in that situation, as things get reshuffled, even though they're tragic events.
Oh gosh, I guess I feel like everything that I was writing about felt so obviously universal, in that regardless of where you grew up. I grew up in the kind of suburbs in Devon, like on the south coast of England, in a particularly nowhere-y place, but everyone feels like the place they grew up is nowhere. And well, certainly in the UK anyway. But so it was for me mostly about trying to capture that I guess perpetual sense of like frustration and optimism that it might be better somewhere else, but also yeah, that sense of muddling through that you think is going to leave you. Like, next year I'm going to stop muddling through, next year I'll be a grown-up or whatever it is, but the muddling through is kind of the universe's gift to you. That's like that's what you've got forever. So yeah, it was, I suppose that's the universality in what I was trying to write, maybe.
I did get that sense, sort of, again, going back to the title of the panel, right, that it's coming of age stories. And when you think of that, you think of like a particular narrative, right, of a kid or a teenager or somebody reaching a turning point in their young life, sort of today I am a man moment. But reading your books, I feel like it's not true. It's a lifelong process. Am I onto something?
Well, that's definitely true in the case of my book. I mean, what I was really trying to put across was how the things that affect us at a young age follow us around, so that especially sexual behavior, it may start at one point, but you don't leave it behind you. It trails after you. And in the same way that it did with my headmaster, who ends up going to prison and then recidivates again. Is that the word?
Reoffends, I guess.
Yeah, reoffends. That, yeah, these things, they follow us, that they don't just disappear or dissipate at some point. They stay with us. So we're in a perpetual state of dealing with them and growing up, I suppose.
I noticed that in No One Else also, Kikuo, that like it wasn't just a little boy, it was his mother too, right, who came to kind of a turning point.
Yeah, I there's three main characters, and in my mind there was an arc for all three kind of growing and changing over the course of the book. In the context of this meeting here, coming of age, I guess in my mind I wouldn't immediately like use that label. I did write my previous graphic novels like explicitly a coming of age story, but to your point, like we are always coming of age, I guess, and each character, and the brother character, the uncle character, is also he's kind of the most childish of all of them in a way. So yeah, it's an interesting frame.
I was going to single you out, Lizzy, but I actually wanted to, because you brought up Night Fisher, can you just tell us a little bit about that too, since we haven't really mentioned it yet?
Sure. Yeah, Night Fisher was a coming of age story, like maybe semi-autobiographical. Came out in 2005. It was my first graphic novel, and we're Fantagraphics is re-releasing it this year along with No One Else. And yeah, I'm excited about it. I did a lot of work back into it, which you're never supposed to do. You're never supposed to be that anal person that goes and fixes all their drawings, but I totally can't help myself. And so I spent months doing that. And It's a coming of age story. Both of my books are set in Hawaii, and Hawaii is where I grew up, and Hawaii is kind of a key element to both the mood and also the story. And so in that sense, both books are similar in that way, but very different in tone. It's almost like the Night Fisher is kind of like a crime noir coming of age story, and then No One Else is more of like a dramedy, maybe just drama.
You mentioned semi-autobiographical, which is a hard word to say when you know somebody's taping you. Semi-autobiographical.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask each of you, I think with Glenn, with your story, it's pretty clear that that is a version of you. But how much, for each of you, how much of you yourself is in these stories?
How much of me is in those stories, is in Chartwell Manor? I would say that that's 100% accurate. Everything that goes on in there. The only thing that's different is, for the sake of narrative, there's some compression. So some events may have happened at a slightly different time than they actually happened in real life. But other than that, yeah, it's all, I think, unless I've forgotten something or I got something wrong, I think it's all probably all true.
Kikuo, how much of the stuff, and oh, Lizzy, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Go ahead.
I would say that it is not autobiographical, but it is personal. So it's very much relates to the generalized experience of me and my friends and the ways that we grew up, and I suppose the feelings, like, because all of the stories were written over, like, they're kind of the things that I've done in between commercial illustration jobs, in between books, bless you,
Myself.
in between books and things. So each story generally was kind of bashed out for a zine for like a comics fair or whatever over a month. So the stories themselves sort of chart a journey separately, and then they're kind of smushed together into a book in a kind of order. But so for me, I know like what I was doing and where my life was when I was making each of those stories, because some of them are 5 years ago and some of them even further back potentially. So in that sense, it's autobiographical, but that is very abstract and no one else is going to pick up on that. So that's not very useful. But yeah, they're just personal, I think. Yeah, and then there's some things that are like references that as the kind of fun stuff you get to put in books. It's like jokes for your friends and, you know, various experiences that we've kind of laughed about that I've then stolen. Wholesale.
I wanted to ask you particularly because that moment with the fox, the sick fox, and building the shelter over the fox with all the, that sounded so real. That's like something me and my friends would have done. Yeah,
it's absolutely, like, I think when I was very little, a small bird fell out of a nest, and I was fully convinced I'm going to nurse that bird. I'm going to make it better. I can probably talk to it in the way that, you know, only an intense 6-year-old girl can really do with a small bird. So yeah, it didn't happen, but I feel like it happened. In my soul. Yeah.
I had the same question about the fox. It's felt so, I'm shocked to hear that was not 100% autobiographical. Beautiful story.
All lies.
So how much of Lauren's adventure in Night Fisher is
well, the statute of limitations hasn't worn out just yet. So
okay, fair enough. Maybe I should not ask such an explicit question.
But there, about maybe 50% of Night Fisher is autobiographical. But weirdly, there's that weird contradiction with fiction where I feel like none of those events happened in real life, but in a weird way, I feel like it's so much more autobiographical. I feel more connected. The 3 characters who are very different in the story, I feel like they're 100% 3 different versions of myself. So that's that weird thing about fiction, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that that's also the weird thing about autobiography, because like, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
A lot of the autobiographical stuff in my book, they feel like creations, like my drawing my mother or my father or the headmaster. They seem like things that are invented as opposed to something that comes straight from life, you know? I'm not sure why that would be. It's just that I suppose in the translation and my style is, I don't know, kind of surreal anyway. It just has a way of seeming like that. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could say that the people were real, but the invention of them on the page is your creation.
Yeah, that's true.
I did actually want to talk about visual styles because each of you have such a distinct visual style. And I wanted to sort of talk about what I like to talk about with comics creators is how style influences story and sort of which comes first. So how, Glenn, particularly with your work, because it gave me the same kind of like squirmy, I'm going to be haunted by this forever feeling that I got from like reading Phoebe Gluckner as a little kid. Well, not a little kid, I was like maybe 11, but that was too young to be reading Phoebe Gluckner.
It is, I agree.
But I do want to hear about everybody's influences and sort of what was going on artistically in your world when you were creating these things.
Okay. What was going on in my world? I don't know. I was just trying to capture it as accurately as possible. And I was also really trying to reflect my own background in underground comics. There's a lot in my book that is actually about underground comics and seeing them for the first time when I was in this kind of very demonic place. You know, there was instances of being told about satanic rituals and things like that when I was a kid there. And later on in that chapter, there's me coming across underground comics, which are just as demonic in their own way. So I was trying to reference that. I was thinking about that a lot. My style, I guess, in a lot of ways grows out of that era of comics too. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I asked about your influences, so does anybody else want to chime in? Because I think both of you do have very distinct styles.
Oh. So much like in the previous answer, because they're done at different stages, it sort of depended on what else I was doing at that point in time. How the stories ended up looking was kind of, yeah, a direct result of whatever else I was doing. So a lot of them represent me having a go at something else. So if I'm normally painting with watercolor, then I'm going to do this one with a brush pen or whatever. Yeah, because I guess I never expected them to be a book or to be seen by anyone, really. So yeah, so they're kind of produced kind of as a like a fun little side game. But the I suppose the Heavy Air, the Fox one, is kind of the one where I was most conscious of the process. So that was like all the backgrounds were ink wash paintings, and then the characters were drawn in charcoal over the top, but on separate layers. And so the idea originally in the first iteration of it was that the characters were kind of transparent, so you could see this estate that they live on through the background. But it was fundamentally unreadable. You couldn't pick apart the information well enough. You could on screen where you've got the nice backlit glow, but yeah, on paper it looked awful. So I changed it. But yeah, I think that one, the process was the thing that I was most conscious of as I was making it. I think a lot of the other ones are kind of, what do I have to hand, and what is not. What is not a children's fiction book? What is going to feel like the opposite of my day job? Yeah.
Did you think about matching style and story, Kikuo, or?
I did. So with No One Else, it's kind of it's just the nature of the story. It's the most internalized conflict I've ever taken on. My Night Fisher, there's a little more action. And then I also did a kid's book called The Shark King, which was kind of explicitly using the tropes of action and adventure comics. Whereas tackling No One Else, where all the conflict is internal, it's kind of the subtext of the story as opposed to in front of you. And I've found that I needed a much more nuanced approach and a softer touch. And I ended up using kind of a more regular rhythm, just a lot of straight grid. and as pared down a style as possible. I was really trying to go, thinking of it like a font that would disappear, and the story to come through as much as possible. Of course, that never happens in a comic, but like I was really trying to be invisible, and yeah, just try to. The minute you try to use all those fancy, comic telling tropes on the story that I was trying to tell, it felt like it just felt way too over the top and cloying. So somehow something more, maybe almost graphically boring, seemed to actually be more narratively interesting in some kind of paradox.
I wouldn't call it graphically boring. I mean, you do have that repeated use of that bright, vivid orange that kind of threads through the story and also sort of bookmarks it in a way.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So the color is a little bit more has a little more stylistic splash, I guess. And that really came from, growing up in Hawaii, I grew up on Maui, which was like mostly covered in sugarcane in the 80s. And the way they harvest the sugarcane in Hawaii is they would actually light the entire field on fire. And so it was very normal to, like, at recess, like ashes raining down on us, and we call it Hawaiian snow. And it wasn't until I was an adult, I was home, I was like 35 and like sitting on my porch watching the ash fall. I'm like, this is crazy. This is an insane thing that we do. And it's also so visual. And I had actually come up with the plot for no one else while I was living in Cape Cod. And once I kind of took the story and put it in Hawaii, that's when I was like, I have to draw this. This is like all the characters fell into place. The whole story shifted in it, and it felt real to me. And so that orange came in as a necessity to draw, to add the heat to the fire that I wanted to draw, but also became a metaphor as well.
Glenn, actually, I'm going to now admit that I've only read Chartwell Manor. I'm really sorry. But that was primarily black and white, right? Do you use color at all? How do you think about that?
Oh, at first I thought you were saying you'd only read my book amongst the three that are.
No, of your work, I have only read Chartwell Manor.
No, it's black and white is really basically how I always work. When I went to art school, we really studied the simplicity of graphics of, say, like Nancy Comics or Dick Tracy. And that's really the only way I know to work. It's basically what I studied, and it's what I know, and I just go for that kind of clarity. And I go for kind of a noir approach to my work as well. I mean, I really want my comics to kind of read like a movie, maybe a black and white movie. And so I've rarely done color comics, really. It's the method I'm used to working in.
That's interesting that you describe it as a movie, because when I'm thinking back over reading Chartwell Manor, I feel like there were a lot of like establishing shots of the building.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it was
I always thought about that. Yeah, sure.
It was a very cinematic effect.
Yeah, so that you always know exactly where you are and you can move the story along through there. It's kind of basic, but yeah, a lot of the stuff I really loved, 70s movies, Scorsese, stuff like that. A lot of the New York scenes are really influenced by that, really trying for that kind of 70s crime feel in a lot of ways for the look of it. Even though, the story is very personal, I really go for a very propulsive, almost pulpy storytelling kind of thing. It's sort of anathema for autobiographical comics to be boring. It kind of kills me. So I try to avoid that at all costs.
Pulpy, that's an interesting adjective, because as I was reading the book, I did not think pulpy. What makes you use the word?
Well, like a horror comic, which is very pulpy. I mean, I can relate my stuff to some of that, Have
you read My Favorite Thing is Monsters?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of that. But I don't read a lot of graphic novels, but yeah, that was one of my favorites. I thought that was terrific.
So you just suddenly made me think about that when you just as you were talking this minute. I was like, oh God, I have to ask this person if he's read that book. And if you all haven't read it, it's incredible. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by being a fangirl. Okay. It is my understanding that at least for Night Fisher and for It's Not What You Thought It Would Be, you were taking older work and kind of either reworking it or assembling it to tell a story. So I wanted to ask what the experience was like of essentially collaborating with your younger selves.
Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. I have no system for anything. What putting this book together told me is nothing is uniform. Oh, I scanned that at that resolution. Great. Well, that's not the same as that resolution. Good job. Yeah, so on a very boring technical sense, it was a nightmare. Things were different sizes. Things were, yeah, all horrible. But it's always nice. It's nice to go back to something and realize it's not like awful, because I think certainly for me in the moment after I put something out, like it already feels ancient and like a thing that's not relevant. Like the minute after you close the page and you're like, well, that means nothing to me anymore. But it's always really exciting to then come back, and you need a good chunk of time, or I need a good chunk of time anyway. And then suddenly you're like, oh yeah, that was what I wanted to say. Or that was the image that I was trying to get at. And that's always a nice surprise, I think.
Yeah. Night Fisher is 16 years old, about 16 is the age of the protagonist almost. And coming back to it was, the main thought I had was like, what were you doing in your 20s? Like you just like were broke and like had a desk crammed under a bed and just drew and just piled up ink drawings on walls. And like, I was just kind of marveling at like, what kind of 20-year-old, like, I don't know, I'm just not that person anymore. And I'm kind of like, where did that fire go? That was my overwhelming reaction. But also like, yeah, I thought like, well, this isn't, for a long time, I'm terrible. Like whatever the last bad review I read is the one that is the truth about my book. And so I had like 15 years of the worst reviews like ringing in my ear. And I wish I didn't read them, but I cannot help myself. And I just like am sitting and by the end of the revision process, which I probably shouldn't have done, but the revision process was more for me to feel okay about putting it back in the world than it was about like changing the story in a dramatic way. But that was the experience for me.
So actually, how long did it take you to write Chartwell Manor?
Well, to do the entire book, it took me 5 years from start to finish. And it was a very cut and dried process of writing the whole thing and scripting it and doing breakdowns and then penciling all of it and then inking all of it. So it was very mechanized. There's a lot of detail work, and it's really the only way I know how to work to really get a lot done. It's a long book. It's 236 pages, which for me is quite a bit. And so, yeah, that's how that had to happen. I can relate to everything everybody's saying here about when you finish the book, you finish the work, it's finished, and you really kind of don't want anything to do with it. And my feeling about that is that it's kind of like while you're working on a project, it's alive. And when you've finished it, it becomes a dead object. And paradoxically, that's the most crucial time because you've got to get that thing out there. You've got to get people seeing it. So you can't just leave it like it's a dead object. So you really have to push it. And that was really true in this case, because when I finished it, that's when COVID hit. So nobody knew what was going to happen with publishing, let alone Fantagraphics. And so that was a thing. I started my next project. And then by, I guess it was last summer, I had to come back to it and work on the covers, do all the color that was required and the design work and clean it up. And it felt like something ancient, even though I'd finished it only like 3 or 4 months ago. So, you know, there's always that thing with comics, you know, because it's such a mechanical medium and it's so cold-blooded that you really do want to be sure that everything is going to come out just like you want it to, just like you designed it, you know. And fortunately, Fantagraphics is great for that. I will say, you know, that the production I got on this book and the last few things I've done for them have come out exactly like I wanted. And for a cartoonist, that's no small thing. You know, anybody that's been doing this work for a while will tell you that they've put out something that, you know, their heart and soul was in on, and it sure looked good when they drew it. But that's not maybe how they saw it when it came out. So, you know, we all have to deal with that.
It's interesting that you call comics cold-blooded. I mean, I guess like the fact of having to knuckle down and actually draw everything, you have to be relatively dispassionate maybe, but.
Well, I just see it that way because basically comics either work or they don't on a general level. You know, if you ever read Peanuts or Dick Tracy or any of these things, they're very basic and they have to follow. They have to read exactly as you intend or you screwed up. You know what I mean? So in that way, I think of it as very cold-blooded. The graphics and the design and all those things really have to be working to your advantage or you made a mistake. So in that respect, I look at it as cold-blooded. It's a difficult medium. I can always understand people not doing comics for a while and just painting, because it's not necessarily all that satisfying to just be sitting there drawing panel after panel after panel for the sake of a greater purpose, you know, for a bigger story, you know.
Yeah, I drew comics for a hot second in 8th grade and then I gave it up real fast. So it was too much work.
It's a lot more fun to do like sketchbook work or something like that. That's not, comics is like really highly performative. You know, you do want to give people a good ride. You do want to put on a good show. You're very much involved in that kind of thing. Maybe more so than other mediums. It's a lot like movies or TV that way. You know, you really want people to have enjoyed what you offered them, you know?
I actually want to go back to something that Kikuo said about like sort of looking back and thinking, hey, this is crazy. Was there, as you were kind of looking at your past, all three of you, like, and sort of coming up with these comics and thinking about your lives, was there a moment where you looked back from adulthood or, you know, this part of the process that we're in at least, and thought, what was I doing?
A great deal of my book is really about looking back on all these things and thinking, what was I doing? Whether I was driving drunk on PCP or some of the later acting out that I did. I mean, it really is a process of looking back at all the crazy things, both that happened to me and especially my parents not being quite willing to handle it. So a lot of the book, as I say, is really about that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about looking back at it and being like, how could this have happened? You know, and taking it from there and trying to deal with it, trying to come to grips with it.
I suppose mine's the opposite, the complete opposite of looking back and being like, none of this was crazy. This is like utterly ordinary. There is maybe something in the ordinariness that I think is interesting and of worth. Yeah, I guess that's it. Like, it's just, it's not, it wasn't crazy. It was just, it's just what happened, I suppose. Yeah.
Still had a resonance. I mean, there's a scene at the end where the two women are like, let's just be friends again. And literally the exact same thing happened to me. I had a dear friend and we fell out for 10 years. And then suddenly we were like, why have we been in a fight for 10 years? That's stupid. I miss you. Let's be friends again. It really struck me that moment was sort of universal.
Yeah, well, I was sort of, I feel like there's like your 20s are this bit where you just kind of, you're miscommunicating with just every single person, that particularly the people that you care about the most. You're like not saying the thing or not like both second guessing what the other person means, or assuming, bringing your own stuff to the table and assuming that's reading that into whatever someone else is saying to you. So yeah, that story was like, felt like like an apology to all those people that you were like, I said the wrong thing and I didn't mean to. Yeah.
It's nice to be able to sort of to have grown past that and then to have a medium in which to express all the things that you wish you'd said or that you said wrong.
Yeah, it's good to be able to like publicly apologize in a charming way. Yeah.
So that's sort of interesting to think about. Like, is there a way in which for you guys also that these have been a way of like speaking to, these stories have been a way of speaking to people that you wish you could have spoken to at the time the stories were happening?
I guess it's like,
well, I feel like it's a dumb question because you've already said that's kind of what's going on.
Well, yeah, but it's also like it's a very one-sided conversation. So it's quite selfish. For me, I'm very conscious of the selfishness of writing from life sometimes. Can feel like I think I'm being gross, so I've got to, pull it back a bit and not because you can only ever tell the story from your side, even if you're projecting what someone else might have thought of it. It's still it's still yours and you're still the one that gets to say it. And it's a very fortunate position to be in, to be the one that gets to publicly say the things. Yeah, so it does, for me, it feels very one-sided, and I'm always trying to be conscious of my impulse to be autobiographical, because it pulls other people in, and if they're still around, it can be tricky, I suppose. You've got to navigate a whole load of things, which is why I try and fictionalize as much as possible, because I'm not capable of it.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. I guess in a lot of ways, there's a processing that I'm going through where, like, I'm doing a book like this partly because I feel like I'm not allowed to, which is sort of one of the basic kinds of energy behind underground comics. I think that there's certain material you're supposed to leave alone. Like, I'm not supposed to do this story about having been abused. It feels like material that is either too yucky or too frightening, so that I shouldn't go there. And because I'm not supposed to go there, I go there. That's just my nature. And the other things that go with that are, and this is also kind of adolescent, is getting even. Like, my headmaster would prefer it that he stay buried, not that I dig the corpse up and show it to the world. So that's exactly what I did. And on top of that, what follows from that too is some element of forgiveness. It's just a sliver, but if you read the whole book, you may see that he's just like everybody else. He got caught in something and he played out the hand that he had, and it may have been evil, but it was the one that he had. And it was, to a greater or lesser extent, how we all end up living. So those are my feelings about bringing somebody up like that. He's dead anyway, so I sure don't have to worry about offending him. But I don't really worry about offending anybody, because I just tell the story as truthfully as possible.
Do you feel, can I ask Glenn a question?
Sure, man.
Do you feel like, you've done autobiographical comics in the past? Do you feel like this one was different with regards to, like, just that maybe the getting even feature, or any of the things you just listed? Did this one feel, because of the material, feel different in a way, or was it par for the course?
This one really felt different. This was a much bigger deal to work with. It was a much riskier project than I dealt with before. My last book was actually a coming of age book about being kind of crazy and dropping out of art school and ending up in Chicago and being on the streets and homeless and all that. And this is really going, I think, a lot deeper into the heart of the matter of some of the behavior that really affected me. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think it was, it was a very demanding kind of work to do. To do something like this, I really had to throw caution to the wind and just tell the story as it happened, and make no attempt to make anyone look bad or good, including myself. Just tell it as truthfully as possible, as honestly as I could.
Thanks for doing my job for me. I like it when other people jump in with smart questions. But I do want to push back on the idea that being autobiographical is selfish, because, I mean, I was just saying a minute ago that there was something in your book that felt universal and resonated with me. So, you know, part of this, I think, is putting your story out there in the hopes that it will resonate with other people.
Yeah, I suppose I don't mean the thing in itself is the work is selfish, but the telling of the story from your perspective and presenting it as the truth, which is what outwardly for everyone reading it will assume it is, it comes with some element of, like, prioritizing your own view of it, which is, I suppose, inherently selfish. I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing. And obviously, in order to make art, you've got to have a fairly stubborn, somewhat selfish streak. But yes, it's nice when then you get, like, a universal moment from that story. So it's getting dark here, so I'm like really getting more blurry. Yeah, it's about to get properly dark.
I guess because you're 5 hours ahead of us. But that actually sort of brings me to something that I like to ask authors in general, which is, what do you want people who've read your books to come away with, to come away thinking or feeling or having gained something from the experience? If, you know, once I've read your book and put it down, what do you want me to be taking away?
What's that for me?
Anybody, jump on in.
Okay. What do I want people to take away? I don't know. I've been getting asked that question a lot, but basically, what I'd say is to define your own experiences. Nobody else defines them for you. This was a very important part of the book because, like, if you've been abused, if you've been put through certain kinds of things that are difficult in your life by maybe bad people, they are trying to define you. That's part of what they see their job as being, in my opinion. And in doing this book and telling the story and getting the book out, one of the things I'm expressing is that I define the terms, I define the story, I define the character, I define myself, my parents, everything. So it's a sort of radical self-definition that I'm, I guess, espousing. So I guess I'd say that.
Lizzy or Kikuo, do you want to jump in? I'm asking this to everybody. You can't weasel out.
I don't know. I suppose, yeah, I don't think it, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'm that intentional. Yeah, I guess I suppose I would like people, particularly women, to recognize something that they relate to. But it's also nice if people don't. And I'm like, that's a different thing. I had it different. Yeah, I guess just some level of comfort, perhaps.
No, that's interesting because I ask this question a lot because I always get a really interesting answer. But of course, it didn't really occur to me that you don't always have to be intentional when you're putting art out into the world. You can just be like, I made a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, Kiko.
For this book, for no one else, I just hope that when people turn to the last page, they smile. Maybe they smile. That's what I'm hoping for. If they turn to the last page and they go, what? Like, that's what I'm not going for. But I'm sure that there's going to be a % of readers that will feel that way.
There was a little bit of what? Because the first frame of that ending sequence, I thought it was going to go a very different way.
Right. Yeah,
I was like, oh, okay. And then.
Yeah.
So for those of you whose books have been out in the world for a little while, what have people been saying to you? What's the reaction been? And if nobody has an answer, that's fine.
Mine's not out, so.
Mine just came out yesterday, and I've been getting a lot of very emotional responses from people who pre-ordered it and got it. One guy read it and he said he had dropped it twice because he was shocked by some of what went on in it. And he even sent along a little photo of where the corner of the book was dented from where he dropped it. So I guess I could say that people are reacting to it, which is very important to me. I want a reaction to this book. One thing I would add, though, just to what Kikuo said that I agree with is, he said he wants people to smile when you get to the last page. And that goes with just how it works with comics. I mean, you want to engage people, entertain them. You want them to have enjoyed your story. I think that's universal for cartoonists, for storytellers. And so that's also in there. I mean, I'm not doing something just to be cathartic. I'm really trying to take people for a good ride. I think that's what they want. It's what they deserve. If they're going to pay $30 to own my graphic novel, I better be giving them something, and it better be a good story. So
that was about it. I mean, I always like to sort of finish off by just making sure there's something that there's nothing that I've missed that you maybe wanted to talk about that I overlooked.
I'll start. all I wanted to say is I really enjoyed the other authors' work here, both Lizzy and Kikuo. It was really, I read both your books yesterday and I got a lot out of them, and I was happy to see that. And also just to see that 3 such different artists were included here, because stylistically we're totally in different worlds, but we're all dealing, I think, successfully with emotional content, which is what interests me. So it was good for me to see that that's being done well, and I enjoyed them. So that's it. Thanks.
No, I agree. I was saying earlier before you logged on that this was one of the pleasures of doing panels like this, is that I get to read all of this disparate work that normally I might not be exposed to. And it really was enjoyable and intense and interesting and a good ride all the way around. So thank you guys so much. Lizzy Stewart, Kikuo Johnson, and Glenn Head. I'm again Petra Mayer with NPR Books. And thank you all so much. This was really great.
Sure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.